novelist, but she's not just a novelist, she's a painter. We found that out recently. Now she's a poet. The poets are the real studs. They are the real studs when it comes to literature, right? I'm not a poet, but I will say that they are. I've had Jack Driscoll once said that's the highest literary art. So, and speaking of our team members, Laura, did you notice how when she comes up, she like gets right to the point? She like right in. I'm the opposite. I'm all preamble. So, you're timing me? All right. Oh, my preamble's free. All right. Yes. I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I'm going to read a sex scene. So, and apologies to those of you who were there for the last night for the reading. We had Northern Appalachia Review reading, so I'm going to read that same thing. The time fits, and I just want to give it another try. It's a sex scene between lobsters. So it's. They do? Yeah, I learned a lot of things about lobster sex, and I think you're all gonna. I'll bet you're not gonna be able to guess some of the things you're about to learn in this story. So, this story is written from a female point of view, and I like to say it's a story with undertone. That's one of the things I was working with in it, and I like to hear when an author gets up. I sometimes like to hear a little bit about their craft, and there's two women in this scene having a conversation, and at the time I had learned something about adding tension and maybe juxtaposing your main characters with somebody else who's an interloper, hearing what's going on, or at least that third conscience or other persona in the room. So our main character, this is the only story I've ever written that's not set in Pennsylvania, which is nearest to my heart. This story is set in Maine, but the main character is from Pennsylvania. She's a grad student doing a natural inventory near Castine, and she's very much in tune with the environment that she's seeing that reflect something that's going on inside of her in terms of this idea of sexuality. So you're a native Mainer, I said. Salt in my blood. I leaned into the table and teased. Do you, a Mainer who studies lobsters, actually go into the ocean? Or are you a misogynist of the sea, like these lobstermen I hear about? Actually, she said, taking me very seriously, I dive. And what do you see down there? Sex. She shifted her shoulders over the back of her chair as the waiter placed her vegetable strudel on the table. I study lobster sex. The waiter set out my plate and a fresh drink for each of us. These, he said, nodding toward the bar, are compliments of the bearded one. I followed his nod. Terry gave no expression, just a stare of acknowledgement to Susan's wave. It could as well have been a challenge. That's a male, Susan said. She pointed her butter knife at my lobster. I slid my fork under the tail, lifted it, and peeked. You'll never find a penis there, Susan said, chuckling. Genitals are not always obvious. She tapped a bulbous upper claw. I know by how big these are. She leaned ahead and whispered, but if you must know, lobsters actually have two penises. I too leaned ahead. Double trouble. And we burst out giggling. Susan's eyes teared, and hard as she tried, she couldn't speak. She kept holding up her finger and sipping at her beer to extinguish the laughter, but every time erupted again, and it would catch with me. We guffawed all the harder when we noticed Terry watching, seemingly embarrassed, looking away. Everybody in the restaurant cast eyes on us, even the little boy in the high chair. Oblivious to the onlookers, Susan panted out, "There's no justice for a lobster, boy or girl." And though she paused and composed herself, her whisper was no less loud. His penises are so tiny, they couldn't penetrate even if the female had a vagina. I intentionally met the eyes around us to make them look away. No vagina? Susan shook her head. He deposits sperm in a receptacle. The female carries it around for months until she's ready to extract her eggs. She scrunched her brows. Such an ugly term, receptacle. With a glance, I indicated the three at the bar. Appropriate, though, from the male point of view. I frowned at my lobster. So what's it like? Some sort of molestation? Susan stiffened with mock formality. Robin, may I touch your lobster? I clasped my hands on my chest. Well, I've never. Pushing aside her plate, Susan picked up my lobster and set it before her. The act is quite tender. She took from her lap her napkin, cranberry colored like the lobster, folded it lengthwise, and held it in the middle as she would another lobster. Before she could mate, Susan said, waving the napkin, the female had to shed her shell, so she's very fragile. She aimed the napkin into the lobster's face. To calm those big claws, she flushes scent through the water. Most of the diner's eyes had gravitated back to us. The place went silent when Susan set down the napkin and began walking my lobster on end. He circles the female and strokes her. She tilted the lobster and brushed its antennae across the napkin. Crude as the mind was, Susan puppeted with proficiency, her cropped-nailed scientist's fingers nimble and tender in choreographing this moment of intimacy, the movements at once adroit, motherly, erotic. A man somehow could not carry out this scene. I've seen the foreplay go on for half an hour. Quite gentle and patient lovers, these brawny boys. She moved the lobster to the end of the napkin. Then the male approaches from behind and gently, ever so gently, uses his legs to turn her. Robin rotated the napkin and eased the lobster down. Face to face, they began fanning their every appendage, faster and faster. As she stroked the napkin with my lobster, I forgot the Friday night patrons watching Susan's gentle love directing. I was enthralled with this hard-shelled animal doing soft porn on our tablecloth. The lovers may have been a dead shellfish in a napkin, but at the bottom of my spine, warm butter churned. I knew not whether it was from a perverse eroticism I found in the theatrics of inanimate objects or the virtuosity of the director's movements. Susan held the thorax of the lobster with one hand, and with the other began spanking its tail against the napkin. She looked at me. They madly thrashed against each other. Then he thrust his hard little penises against her and spilled semen into the receptacle. She grinned, bit her bottom lip, and looked down at the lobster. Ah, she said, giving a final jab at the tail. Then he dismounts, and get this. She set down the lobster, the napkin's faintly tapered waist moist from the body of the seducer. He eats her shell. Missionary, I said, staring at my lobster. Yet he never actually penetrates her. Never, I repeated. Meeting eyes, we were too tipsy to contain those grins that want to squeeze out in the silence following awkward moments. My cheeks warmed and I looked away. Faces turned like falling dominoes, some amused, most appalled. Roddy and Darren, at either side of Terry, were all smiles. They pretended to wipe sweat from their brows, gave silent claps, and swiveled back to the bar. But Terry neither smiled nor turned away. That warm butter at my loins congealed, and I held up my plate for Susan to return my lobster. Thank you.